It's officially running backs week at Lettermen Row. That means Andy Backstrom's in the middle of your screen discussing it all. The 41-year vet Tim May over there on the other side discussing it all. And me, Spencer Holbrook, back for another position week at LettermenRow.com and on the Lettermen Row YouTube channel. Gentlemen, running backs, there's two at the top. There's two or three, depending on who you ask, in the second tier. And this is going to be a pretty damn good unit, Tim, for the Ohio State running backs.
Yeah, not second tier, the other tier, right? There's two tiers. Yeah. Who isn't fired up to see Quishon Judkins run for Ohio State based on what you've seen from him before? I leave the particulars in terms of exact number of yards and carries over the last 2 years to Andy Backstrom, who has a photographic memory and can reel those off like that, like Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting. But I digress. Who isn't fired up about seeing Quishon Judkins just based on the little bit we got to see of him in the spring? This guy combines power and speed, man, and boy, he gets the ball out of the backfield also. And then TreVeyon Henderson, we all know what his talent level is. Consistency, being available from 1 week to the next has been his bugaboo the last couple of years. But you put those two together, it's hard to believe there are two more talented two backs in the country on any team than those two guys. And we'll get into the other guys in a minute, I'm sure, the freshman and then TC Caffey, who, it's hard to believe even a MAC school didn't want that guy, right? And from what we've seen of him, so coming out of high school. But I think this looks like a very good running back room that would have been enhanced, of course, if Dallin Hayden hadn't opted to leave for the great state of Colorado.
Yeah, Andy, the top two there in particular, that's pretty special. We don't see this kind of tandem often in college football, especially nowadays with the transfer portal and everything. It's hard enough to keep two like that in your program. It's even harder to go out and land one to make it a two-back system in the transfer portal. It should be a pretty special year for both TreVeyon Henderson and Quishon Judkins.
Well, what's interesting about Quishon Judkins is that, he has these prolific numbers his first 2 years at Ole Miss, but he wasn't the top 20 overall prospect that TreVeyon Henderson was in the 2021 overall class. You have Quishon Judkins in the 2022 class was the number 37 running back according to On3 industry ranking. And so you look at it, he was a 3-star guy that came in and hit the ground running. He didn't start actually at the beginning of that season, which is interesting. Zach Evans was the guy at Ole Miss, and then, just chugging along. Quishon Judkins was way more productive. And then by the end of the season, he started the final 6 games, and he ended up with 1,567 rushing yards that season, which was the second most all time of any SEC rusher. Herschel Walker had 1,616 yards back in 1980, which was the top of that list. So that is a pretty good company to have right there, Herschel Walker and Quishon Judkins. He was a little bit less productive last year as a sophomore, but he dealt with a bit of an upper body injury at the beginning of the year. So that factored in. Still hit 1,000 yards. So I think he was one of 9 Ole Miss players all time to rush for 1,000 yards, needed it twice back-to-back seasons. So this is just, the production is there, but back-to-back seasons of 270 or more carries. So the question is, what is his body going to be like in year 3? We always have that question with running backs. Can they kind of keep that up with the wear and tear? I think that's part of the reason why he came to Ohio State, was to not have so much wear on his tires going into the NFL after this season. That's the goal, at least. And so that's going to be interesting to see how they regulate that workload between TreVeyon Henderson and Quishon Judkins and how both their bodies respond.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to watch those guys. The thing that I took away from looking at Henderson and Judkins is Henderson has a little bit more of that home run hitting ability. TreVeyon, in all reality, and just being honest, TreVeyon's been kind of boom or bust in his career. He's either getting more than 10 yards or he's kind of getting stuff behind the line of scrimmage, and I don't know if that's entirely his fault. The injury definitely helped, hampered him in 2022, especially, we think about that Maryland game. I think he had a 30-yard or 40-yard catch and run for a touchdown on a reception. Other than that, I think he had like 16 yards on 15 carries or something like that. It was not good. But then you get the burst, like we saw in the Notre Dame game, where he's got 20 carries for 21 yards and then a 75-yard touchdown run to kind of put Ohio State in control of that game. You get the another run later in the season where he just hits a hole and it's like, oh my gosh, like this guy is truly special. I think that was the Minnesota game where he kind of ran away from everybody. So he's been kind of a boomer bust guy, where Quishon Judkins, No, he doesn't have the 6.3 yards per carry like TreVeyon does. He doesn't have the home run ability maybe that TreVeyon does. But guess what, man? Like, he's getting 4, and like good luck bringing him down, because he's probably getting 4 when he touches it. Like he's not the. I don't know if TreVeyon's the most efficient runner. I think Quishon's a little bit more efficient, but that doesn't mean that either of them are bad in any way. And I think that together, the fact that TreVeyon's a home run hitter and Quishon's a tackle breaker and really powerful in his own right, I think they're like the perfect combination for each other, Tim. And I think that's what makes this so exciting for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I mean, what we're curious about, or at least I'm curious about, is how is Chip Kelly going to employ them in his offense? Are we going to see, which I've been waiting to see for a while now, are we going to see 2-back sets where they're both on the field at the same time, which will cause a matchup problem for defenses, because both of these guys are proven, like you said, when TreVeyon Henderson is when he is healthy, he is as good as anybody in the country in terms of the home run hitting aspect of things. And, the 10, 12, 15, 30-yard carries and stuff, so which are doubles and triples. And then Quishon Judkins will run through arm tackles, has enough speed to skirt left or right, so, and then, of course, you add that with everybody, I think most of us believe that Will Howard, for one reason, by hook or crook, will be the starting quarterback when it begins. When you add that with the running ability of Will Howard in the backfield, boy, that just is a triple option, almost quadruple option threat, because he can always pull back and throw the ball. That I think most of us, I think Chip Kelly's going to get to that in some form or fashion. And so, yeah, the prospects, the possibilities of that kind of situation, I think are excitable for anyone.
Yeah, Andy?
Yeah, just to clarify that Herschel Walker stat, that's just among SEC freshmen, but nonetheless still impressive.
Still
but yes,
impressive.
Yeah, the thing with this running back duo is the floor is really high because they're both running backs that can be productive even with subpar offensive line play. And I think that's another big question that kind of joins in with this discussion is how is the offensive line going to perform? We saw TreVeyon Henderson do a lot with a little last year running behind an offensive line that was embattled and struggling and new look at times. And even in the Cotton Bowl, he ran for more than 70 yards. And that group was really having a hard time putting anything together. So you got a guy that can make things happen. As Spencer said, he's a home run hitter, the 61-yard touchdown against Notre Dame, the 75-yard touchdown against Minnesota. And all it takes is one run to bust open. Quishon Judkins, like you said, Spencer, maybe a little bit more of the efficient runner and maybe less of the home run hitter, but still has that ability to bust one open as well.
Yes.
And I think that's what makes the floor so high for this group is that it doesn't really matter all that much about the offensive line. It would really help if the offensive line is better. And that would certainly take it to, a top 10 rushing attack. But even if the offensive line struggles, I still think it could be like a top 50 rushing attack just because of how dynamic these two are. And I think that's probably got to be encouraging for Ohio State fans. But I think what's really interesting is the scheme that Chip Kelly can play with here. And I think that's probably maybe the best part of the addition of Chip Kelly. Him being the play caller is obviously the thing that takes off that kind of burden for Ryan Day, and it allows him to be more the CEO of this team, but also just the knowledge that Chip Kelly brings in the run game, different kind of personnel groupings, the creativity, the pre-snap motion, all the little things that he can make it, cover up some of the holes of the offensive line if they do still exist and help this group thrive and kind of maximize its ability. I think that is what I'm most curious to see because talking to coaches, they're confident that even just the scheme changes from last year to this year will help this group of linemen perform better.
Yeah, the line does, kind of determine a lot of this, but I like that you said that. I think Ohio State. So first of all, Ohio State fans, I know that you guys don't sit there and watch every Ole Miss game, and I fully am aware of that because we don't get to watch every Ole Miss game either. If you don't know, Quishon Judkins is good. He's a 2-time All-SEC back. All those accolades by now. Only Herschel Walker rushed for more rushing yards as a freshman. Thanks, Andy, for that in the SEC. But I don't know if many Ohio State fans know what it looks like from Quishon Judkins. And a good reference point that I've tried to keep in the back of my head is Quishon reminds me a little bit of like that the best of, and I'm not saying he's going to rush for 330 yards in the Big Ten championship game, but he kind of reminds me a little bit of like the best of Trey Sermon at Ohio State. You know, he could break those tackles. He was a little bit powerful, you know, compared to what you look at him and see. You know, he's really good and talented pass catcher out of the backfield. And Ohio State didn't have, you know, the perfect offensive line in 2020 like they did in 2019. And I think that the best of Quishon could match the best of what Trey Sermon was. And then you throw in what TreVeyon was, you know, and continues to be for this Ohio State offense. And it does become pretty dangerous, but you can't just rely on those two guys. And I think that's where this conversation goes from here. Is like Quishon, if he's, you know, some sort of Trey Sermon type player, and if TreVeyon Henderson is what we've expected from TreVeyon the last 3 years, you still need a third back. And I think third is most important, but, you know, Chip Kelly said after the spring game, you want to be developing that depth. They want all 5 of those guys to be ready, but I think they definitely need a third guy to emerge and step up. Now on the site, on Wednesday afternoon, I predicted that third guy who would step up would ultimately be James Peoples, but I'm willing to hear arguments from anybody about anybody at this point. Tim, when you look at the rest of this depth chart, it's James Peoples, it's Sam Williams-Dixon, it's TC Caffey. Who stood out to you in spring ball?
People's choice, James Peoples. I think Sam Williams-Dixon was a little bit banged up, if I remember correctly, or not full go for a while. I may be wrong on that during the spring and stuff, but I like him a lot too, man. I mean, I'm not, you know, these guys were recruited by Ohio State for a reason. And what stands out to me about James Peoples is I think he is a home run hitter. He kind of reminds me of a little bit larger J.K. Dobbins. I mean, and it's not just because he's from the great state of Texas, just like J.K. Dobbins was, and really grew up or his high school ball was really only 130 miles from where J.K. Dobbins ran in LaGrange, Texas. James Peoples from San Antonio, north side of San Antonio, Veterans Memorial High School. But you turn on his video, and he has a lot of the same characteristics of running through arm tackles. Now, this is on the high school level, right? But then that burst, man, and a little bit of a jump cut action. He has a lot of things going for him. Sam Williams-Dixon has a lot of those same qualities, in my opinion. I was impressed a little bit. We got to see of him finally in the spring because I hadn't seen a lot of him, even though I'd watched his highlight tape. But I like what he brings in. Caffey, you know, we've talked about him. Heck, we talked about him last year on one of our post game videos. I'm sure. I mean, he just is a guy that is a late bloomer, I guess, because people weren't recruiting him out of high school for some reason. But he believed he belonged at Ohio State, walked on, and shoot, man, when you're one of just 5 running backs, you know, you guys both know how deep they've gone into that running back room the last several years. You never know who's going to be running in the bowl game, right? And so I think all of these guys bring a quality. Are they on the level yet of the 2 starters? No. I mean, Quishon Judkins, if people were paying close attention there while you were talking, Spencer, I was watching his highlights again from last year with Ole Miss when he finally got going again. He had a bounce-out run against Alabama that was extremely impressive, ran through arm tackles, et cetera, against LSU. I'm not just talking about the way he ran against Mercer or Tulane. I mean, this guy's the real deal, and now he's moved up to the big time from the SEC to the Big Ten, and I think he's ready to rock and roll. But I really think Peoples emerges as maybe that third guy because he's a little bit of a, for want of another term, a combo of those 2 guys.
Tim, we'll make sure not to tell Paul Feinbaum that you just called the jump from the SEC to the
already
Big
did,
Ten.
already tweeted and stuff, things I wish I'd said in that Feinbaum thing. I'll get even one of these days.
You might get even if Ohio State brings the national championship back to the Big Ten, Tim. That'd be something 2 straight years if that happens.
It's not really weighing heavily on my mind, however. Go ahead now.
The other thing that Quishon did, Tim, was he established the run basically by himself against Georgia,
yes.
Which is not easy to do. But this isn't about Quishon anymore. We're talking about James Peoples. The thing about James Peoples, Andy, is that his calves are the size of all of our heads combined. That man is built to play college running back. And that's, I guess that's why I lean toward him being that third guy. I think TC Caffey's a good player. but he's got that like Mayan Williams power, almost a little bit of that wiggle, but more power to him. Whereas I think if you're going to have a third running back run the same offense as TreVeyon and Quishon, you're probably looking at a physically ready, college-ready James Peoples who kind of showed up and probably could carry a little bit of the load, but he's not going to be asked to. That's where I lean. Is that your thinking too, Andy? I know that you watch these running backs pretty closely in the spring.
Well, another new face we need to mention is Carlos Lachlan, of course, who's the running backs coach who will make this decision. And I think that it's important to know on one hand that Carlos Lachlan did recruit James Peoples when he was at Oregon. So he has a relationship with, he knew James Peoples coming in. He knew the kind of runner he is. So that helps James's case, I think, in this situation. That being said, Carlos Lachlan is someone that doesn't really care about where you're coming from. He's someone that has an unorthodox path to the position he has now. And he's definitely not going to, factor in recruiting rankings or where you came in and all that stuff. So he's going to just be level-headed and assessing the play of who's performing best on the field. And in the spring game, Sam Williams-Dixon actually outperformed or at least outproduced James Peoples. He ran for a team-high 75 yards. He had a touchdown, 22 yards, just like slingshot it right forward in the open grass and scored a touchdown there. And I think he was impressive in that spring game. And yeah, maybe he didn't catch our eye as much in the other spring practices, but I think that means something, at least towards the end of that game. He was popping up time and time again. I thought he was really impressive. And he's someone that can play kind of all over the place in the offense. He's a Swiss Army knife kind of guy, kind of like a Xavier Johnson, where you probably could line him up in the slot even to play some receiver. He is at running back, but like he has a really good hands. And I think he's someone that you can kind of get creative with in the backfield. So maybe even if he isn't number 3, he could still play a role in that backfield. And then TC Caffey, it's interesting because like last year with Chip Trainum, we kind of just assumed he'd be lower in that pecking order because similar vibe, maybe a little bit more seasoned, obviously not a preferred walk-on, but someone that was coming to Ohio State to play linebacker, a different position than the one he played at Arizona State. And, he ends up having to play because of injury problems in 2022 and then ends up being really, RB2 at most of last season, behind TreVeyon Henderson and, with Mayan Williams being as hurt as much as he was last year. And I think this like TC Caffey can't be written off because just as no one was talking about him in the beginning of spring and then Ryan Day mentions him, you with these guys that sometimes are overlooked, especially at the running back position where it's not replaceable. But if you're producing, you're out there. I mean, it's kind of a bottom line thing where if you're just better than the other person, you're going to be out there. It's not as much about potential or long-term. Can you help us now? Are you good now? And if TC Caffey's the guy, then maybe he gets more run than we're thinking.
That sounds like Andy's is recruiting for Ohio State's running back room there. If you're good enough, you get a shot, right? Hey, the interesting thing is, I don't know if you agree, Spence. I think we're going to see all these guys the first several games. I truly believe that because they've got to do that. Just like at the quarterback room, they've got to get other guys ready to play. And I'm curious to watch these, especially Sam Williams-Dixon and James Peoples play because I think they're going to produce. They are top level recruits, and for like we talked about earlier.
It won't surprise me, Tim, if TreVeyon Henderson and Quishon Judkins get a combined 35 carries against Akron, just so they can give Ohio State fans a preview of what the season's going to look like. Yeah. But then against Western Michigan and Marshall, it's maybe 10 carries each because you're blowing these teams out and you get the other guys in there. It won't surprise me if James Peoples and Sam Williams-Dixon and TC Caffey get the lion's share of the work in those games. And even if you're up 28-0 against Michigan State on the road there in September, James Peoples should be out there. Sam Williams-Dixon should get some run out there. Like, this is not a position, especially in Ohio State knows this too well. This is not a position that you risk injury at any point, and you sprinkle in those other backs. And I think that Chip Kelly and Ryan Day will do a good job of that. There's only 4 or 5 guys in this room, depending on the way that you look at it. We consider it to be a 5-man room, but still not a lot of guys to talk about. And it's a pretty simple position. You run the ball well, you will play. And I think that it's more results oriented than any other position on the football field. Andy Backstrom's here to break it all down. Tim May's here to break it all down all week at LettermenRow.com as we make our way through running backs week. Go to LettermenRow.com right now. $1 for your first 2 months. $1 for your first 2 months. We've got maybe the best recruiting coverage I've seen of Ohio State recruiting in a long time, from Mick Walker, Matt Parker, and Alex Gleitman. That's like a dream team over there. It's like the 92 Olympic team over there on the recruiting side. I don't know what they consider us if that's the Olympic team, but we're something.
I don't think any one of those guys can dunk.
We'll have to put that to the test. Maybe we'll put that on YouTube at some point. I don't know what they consider us. We're just here talking about the Ohio State running backs. For Tim May on the other side of that screen, he's the 41-year vet. For Andy Backstrom and me, Spencer Holbrook. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Head to LettermenRow.com for full coverage of Running Backs Week. We'll see you back here on Friday for another breakdown of the Ohio State Tailbacks Room.